Today we have with us Jim Licata and Brandon Braegelmann. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Hey, Brandon.
So the reason we have the three of us on the call is Jim, you live in a northern suburb of Manhattan, and maybe you can just share a little bit of the detail about you. But from the way you and I have met a while back through investing together, you invested in our fund. We've done a few projects together, that type of thing. But you eventually got to the point where you were interested in doing some projects or some investing in Puerto Rico, and Brandon is in Puerto Rico full time. He's very, very entrenched in that culture and lives there full time. And so, as a real estate broker, Brandon was there to help you look for some property recently when you came down to Puerto Rico. So, just maybe, would you mind just sharing, so we can get the context? Would you mind sharing your background very briefly and how you got to where you're at today of this search?
Sure.
Okay.
A background, as I mentioned, I live in northern Westchester right now, Cortlandt Manor. I grew up on Long Island. So I've always been basically a New York person, Bronx, Long Island, and Westchester. So
I can hear it in your accent.
Hard to hide. A lot of times when I travel down south, the accent precedes me in such a way that I actually will start a meeting or a conversation that, hi, I'm from New York, but being abrasive is a choice, not a prerequisite. And today I choose not to be that way, because the accent just, it has a certain style to it that,
Sure.
Some people, don't warm up too quickly unless you kind of let them know,
Yeah,
you're a nice guy.
Yeah, great.
Well, with that being said, let me start with the background in investing, and then let's move to why Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. And how that actually ties together, because it's really the more of a lifestyle end point conversation versus a starting point conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll do this. The starting point is, I've always been, I guess, since college, I've been interested in real estate, but I didn't really know how to go about it in any effective fashion. So I started a job as a network engineer out of college. I'm a computer guy. So I was a programmer, and then from there, system manager, network specialist, security specialist, and with network background. I was very satisfied. But my whole life was consumed with, the day-to-day problems, involved in, a full-time job. I traveled around the country extensively. I used to keep a overnight bag right by my bed because I'd leave the house on Tuesday and come back on Thursday or Friday. And that was just my regular routine. But it wasn't quite leading the lifestyle I wanted. I was able to, afford the basic foundations, house, car, etc. But there was no real, on future outlook, Mm-hmm. So I got involved in, started reading, and then I got involved with the Rich Dad program, which was a fundamental mindset shift happened when I started, I read the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. And where he talks about this, the fundamental different ways of thinking versus an employee versus being self-employed, mm-hmm. These are being, a businessman, an entrepreneur. And I really saw that reflected in my life, where I thought, a big step up was maybe start my own practice. I'd become a consultant. When I just realized I was just becoming a specialist in something I was already doing. And, if I stopped working, income stopped coming in. Mm-hmm. So at that point I said, let me take some of the courses that Rich Dad offered, because it gave me the philosophy that, you really should be in another quadrant, another, way of making money, talking about passive income. And I really embraced that concept that, what do you do when you stop working? Mm-hmm. And I wasn't near retirement age, but it was a very powerful paradigm that how is your money working for you versus how are you working for money?
Yeah.
So it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks to some level.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I took some of the courses and I went out and I bought some local houses. I bought the triplexes. That seems what I liked. And I started making money with that. Then I had a few other coaching influences. I've had a coaching influence that was more of a marketing, branding, coaching environment that in a way set me off in the wrong direction because it stoked my ego versus enhancing my humanity. And I'll talk about that later if you want, where that was like a fairly good misstep because it took what could have been a positive feature aspect and amplified the negative side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was leaving that environment, I started reading George Anton's book.
Mm-hmm.
And it was more it was more of how money is working for you through private lending. And
Yeah.
then I think that's where I found if you want to call it, space.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I've been involved now with, multifamily residential real estate. I've taken courses in apartments. So I've got involved with apartments. I've also got involved with multiple private placements. In Chicago is my secondary market, where I was involved with self-storage, involved in industrial condos and lending. And from there, so after I started looking into the Anton way of making, money work for me,
Mm-hmm.
I realized there was another influence in the Anton community that hit me very powerfully. And that was the influence of Willie Hooks. Willie Hooks' conversation is more about inner game.
And Willie Hooks is a master coach.
Yes.
For basically mind games and
mindset, really.
mindset.
And I have other people now I've adopted in my life as coaches, and one of the interesting things, the biggest journey is the 6 inches between your ears.
Mm-hmm.
So once you shift the way you want to think about things, the whole world changes around you.
Right. Yeah. No, and you and I, by the way, met through George Anton's his programs, which I think have been really great. And Willie Hooks is also part of that, in a way, part of that group. And so, yeah, they've both been really very influential on my life and on yours too, the way it sounds.
It has. Well, because it wasn't the actual activities, it was shifting the way you think.
Mm-hmm.
And as you shift the way you think, your activities follow. And as I've heard many times, when your activities change, right, and you start doing more of the right things for yourself and people around you, your income changes.
Mm-hmm.
So money is a lagging indicator of you doing the right things.
Yeah.
And you're doing the right things is probably a lagging indicator of you thinking the right way.
Yes. Good
so
point.
That's where, right? And then part of that is surrounding yourself with the right people. And that's where, again, another thing that was really powerful with meeting you and, meeting Brandon, meeting people from multiple organizations like that is, I found that's a real key to anything that has been successful in my life is working with the right people.
Mm-hmm.
I find it's
collaboration,
and it amplifies what you do in a synergistic way. And just like when getting with the wrong group of people, it can be a drain. It can be a psychological and financial drain. With the right people, will just lift you up, empower you, take you to places where you really couldn't go before.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the biggest lessons, though, I've learned through this whole process. It's almost been, written in a song. Chances are you'll go far if you get in with the right bunch of fellows. Yeah.
Great.
But that's true, though, right? If you find the people who empower you and lift you up, like all of a sudden, it's like building they call it build a team around you. But again, it's working with the right people that lift you up, that think the same way, that have the same set of values, that are empowered to move their lives forward in a positive way.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what we always call the cycle of abundance. The more we give, the more we get back, the better we do. The more we can give, the more we get back, even the better we do from there. And so it's a cycle and a ripple effect that we can affect other people. It not only brings a lot of value to us, but we're affecting a lot of other people too. So that cycle of abundance, I think, is really, it's one of those things that just, you can't go wrong by going in with the abundance mindset, sharing what you have, and really being able to reap a lot of the benefits from that, but also feel really good about sharing. And so you got to the point, you're at the point right now where you are sort of making a bit of a transition. And I love your analogy of the maybe you can share your canary in a cage analogy. And I've heard it before, but you describe it well.
Okay, I'm living it. So it's, well, I'll give you the background for it. I'm making the transition from being, a fairly successful network and Wi-Fi engineer to being an investor full-time. And for me, it's the story of the canary leaving the cage was very powerful because it's the emotions I'm experiencing. So the story as I live it is there was this canary, and he spent, the most of his life in a cage with a very, let's call it attentive and, a good caretaker. His owner, I fed him all the time, always cleaned the cage, plenty of water, kept him safe from the cat, put the cover on at night, and a very regulated life and, in a very happy life. He sang his heart out and, for the owner. One day the owner said, "You've been a really great canary for me. I want to reward you with really something special. So I'm going to open the cage and you can have your freedom. I'll bring you outside and go free. Thank you for all your, time you spent with me and the joy you brought into my life." Well, the carrier goes, "This is amazing. I finally have my freedom. I'm free. I'm not going to be in this cage anymore." So he flies out of the cage and into the trees, and wow, he's having a good time. He's seeing other birds out there like himself, and he's bouncing around from branch to branch, sits on a telephone wire for a while. And then, the end of the day comes, and it's, it's strange sounds in the woods and getting a little cold out. He's just getting just a little bit hungry. So, you know what he does? He flies back right into the cage and closes the door behind him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's me, right? I get food, water, my cage is clean, and the cat can't get in.
Yeah, the risk, you have a lot less risk in the cage.
Yeah. So,
but it may restrict the freedom, and so
it might restrict. So the point is, when you're not working for somebody, right? You're not someone's pet, as the canary was. I'm not gonna say, that you have to now start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. That you're gonna have to watch out for yourself. You have to buy your own health insurance. Oh my God. Was that a shock? Oh my God, all my life, someone's taking care of that for me.
Sure. Right,
my gosh, how am I going to, again, it's trivial, right? Once you've gone through it, you realize, fine, you adjust to it and you make sure you have income that covers it and you kind of work differently. But it was a scary thing.
Yeah. So now you're at the position where you're in the cage, and if I can sort of use that analogy, the question would be, is your goal to then have what would it take to make you feel more comfortable coming out of that cage? Would it be the idea of cash flow? Would it be the idea of more savings for retirement?
Good question.
What would that look like? And I think that's where it's always a good place to start, because I actually like starting one step further back, and that is identifying what our passion is, identifying what we're good at, what our purpose is, and then going to that next level of seeing whether it's cash flow or long-term gains, whatever it might be. So have you thought about that, and where would you say you fit in that realm?
Well, let me hit the thing that's most poignant to me first, and that's the safety. So it's really, staying away from the cat, or being able to feel comfortable enough that I can do this on my own. So I'm going to use one of the metrics that was brought up in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is that when your passive income meets or exceeds your expenses, you are financially free. So my goal was to get passive income from rentals, from lending, and from private placements to exceed my current expenses. And I'm just about achieving that right now. So it's taking some of the fear away. That lets me go. So once I remove the fear, the few inches between my brain, things that aren't real. Once I remove some of the barriers that weren't real, I was able to bring the lifestyle back into focus. And that's what I'm starting to do now. I'm starting to get organized. And what I mean by organized is my education has left me with, let's call it, a lot of pieces that have stuck to me over time in an unorganized fashion.
Yeah.
So I'm like something swimming through the ocean with barnacles attached themselves to, when you're a combination of all the moss and barnacles and every ocean you swam through. So every coaching course or every book or something has stuck to me in a very, unplanned way. But don't get me wrong, each one has some richness to it that when cultivated and organized is going to make a better, environment.
Yeah, I think that's a great description. And I know that there are a lot of people that are listening right now that have that same exact feeling of being out there, having gotten a lot of bits of information here, some of it more valuable than other, but there's a lot of pieces that are kind of floating around there. They know that real estate investing has a lot of potential. They love the idea of leverage, but there's a lot of variables or variations in how one can invest, what types of properties, what that might look like. And so you're at that stage right now, from what I understand, where you're sort of bringing that together through a thought process that you're using to get to where you think you're going to find that roadmap or that path that you're looking for.
And I'll summarize in a word called clarity. Trying to get some type of clarity around what I'm currently doing that helps me get even more clarity on what I want to do. Right? Because again, it's the bits and pieces that are coming into focus right now because, they can, again, so that actually brings us almost full circle to, what are the things I look at as my undelegable tasks, what I need to do, and then brings us back into the conversation about Puerto Rico and what I'm trying to do there. Yeah. So it's really a very circular, is once you start getting clarity on what you want to do and start decluttering some of the things that aren't serving you, right, it lets you focus on the things that you must do that leads you to the freedom and the insight to,
Sure. Okay. So this is a great spot where maybe Brandon, maybe if you can share just a little bit about where you're at, your goals, what you do, and how that ties into this conversation with Jim, and maybe talk a little bit about the discussions you've had with Jim, the visit that you had together, and then we can get into what are some of the missing pieces or the pieces that if you had more clarity, you'd be able to help Jim out, maybe achieve his goal a little quicker.
Sure. So I've been in Puerto Rico for the last 3 years. I've been working on a couple fix and flip projects here. I've been working with Kensington on some of our loan projects, and I also have my real estate broker's license here. So basically it's been an adventure getting to know the market here. The market right now is very depressed. So there's a lot of really good opportunities for buying, and especially in rental properties, there's a lot of good opportunities because people still need a place to live, and the rental market here is pretty strong. So Jim and I met at the investment summit, I think it was a couple of years ago in Puerto Rico, and basically got to talking and thought there might be some interesting opportunities for us to work together on finding a multifamily project to get started on, and to help Jim realize his dream of moving to the Caribbean. So at this point, the stage we're at in the game is sort of figuring out neighborhoods in San Juan or in Puerto Rico in general, if we decide to go outside of the San Juan area, that we want to become experts in, and that we want to look for rental properties in. So I guess right now the discussion is basically at where do we want to focus. We've found a couple properties that have looked interesting, and they've kind of been in different parts of the metro area. And Jim, you mentioned you also liked some of the eastern parts of Puerto Rico, and so those would be a possibility for you as well.
Let me jump in here with something. So first I'll share something people may or may not know about me, and then dovetail this into the conversation. I'm an avid sailor, and I'm active in sailboat racing up here in the Northeast.
As a matter of fact, when we spoke yesterday, you said make sure it's not on Wednesday evening because
I go racing. Yes,
every Wednesday evening, which is great. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about here. Let's get to where everybody lives the life they really want, the life of passion that they can have,
and share with people. Because it's not about sailing by yourself. When you're sailing with a crew, right? People you enjoy spending your time with. So I want to extend that as I, go into my investing career and say, well, why can't I set up a lifestyle where I'm making money with passive income and have a reason to come down and visit my investments and spend time where I'm investing? So I said, well, where in the Caribbean would be a great place to do this? And we first went down and met the investment summit. The light bulb went off for me. Puerto Rico is 50 miles from the Virgin Islands. Really? So it's basically really a day's sail away from the Virgin Islands. So you're in the, basically in the United States and have a, real great access to the, the Caribbean lifestyle. That's why the eastern part of Puerto Rico was interesting. But Puerto Rico in general was more of a lifestyle conversation. As you notice my accent, from being from New York, the very traditional path is to go to some part of Florida. Miami almost is the sixth borough to some extent. There's so many people move down there. I said, well, let me take this a step further. Like, how can I get my, that's a natural trend that could be part of my life. Why don't I take the passion for sailing and overlay that, with the idea that I'm not going to like winter, in the next couple of years as much as I used to like it, and try to create a lifestyle for myself. And then the real joy of it is I'm finding people like yourself and Brandon who I can share this with, and again, grow into this kind of conversation. So when we right after the Investor Summit, I actually formed a corporation down in Puerto Rico.
And this, just for clarification, this was a Kensington Summit that we put on. We had about 35 investors.
Yes, that was really nice.
Yeah. And so it was a 3-day, 2.5-day event, I would say. So.
It was wonderful. As far as the content was, the people and speakers you brought in were very deep and informative. Right. Also, the chance that you took us out to see parts of the island itself, was great. You introduced us to lawyers, accountants, and people that can help get things started and form a team. So for me, that was a golden opportunity, golden experience.
Great. Yeah. Well, we're gonna have to work on getting another one going.
Yes, we do. and I'll share how I went. Again, I opened up a company, focused it on banking, and invested in one of your funds, which was a perfect alignment.
Yeah.
So it gave me a chance to see how some of this operates, in a small way. So now that I want to actually we're working with Brandon to buy my own property, I already have a corporation to put it in that's established in Puerto Rico. I already have a bank account. I already have an accountant. I already have, a lawyer to work with. So now it's more of a, just the next step in a progression as opposed to, some wild idea. Hey, let's go invest in Puerto Rico and just jump into it without proper foundation and diligence.
Yeah. That's one thing I noticed about the way you've done this, and it's been over a bit of time, but you've done it very systematic in taking those steps, getting prepared, getting your team lined up, and especially when we're investing in an area that we aren't, that it's not an area that we live in full time, having that really good solid team that support there is really important. And so that's definitely one thing that you've spent time on and done a great job on.
I'll follow that up because everything is cause and effect. I'm going to say I've used some of my worst mistakes to actually change the way I think. And I'll say one of my worst mistakes is, it's really came in, I'm going to take a paraphrase out of someone else's work. And the way they say it, some of the great companies, is they say, fire bullets before you fire cannonballs. The idea is get yourself calibrated. Right. So one of my biggest mistakes when I first jumped into, lending and investing was, wow, I'm going to make it over. I'm going to fire a cannonball and hit the target dead center right away. And wow, am I going to be a great success?
Yeah.
Okay. A little prideful there, a little egotistical possibly, So that's how I approached to Puerto Rico was say, okay, let me get calibrated. Let me take a few very, focused shots with small caliber. I don't want to use too much of a militaristic, but it was a nice analogy. That you try small things, you calibrate yourself, you watch the results. Yeah. If you hit the target, wonderful. Do more of it. If you totally miss the target, change your aim.
Yeah, right.
So that's where I'm coming from with, okay, now let's go, Brandon, let's go pick a multifamily property that's in a working class area that's going to have good cash flow for rentals, right? And get ourselves started there. We might have a larger goal in sight, like a nice, villa in Culebra, but that's not where we're going to start. We're going to start in San Juan, where people work for a living. They need good housing, good clean housing at an affordable price. And if I can find the right property with the right financing, I'd like to come in and actually, again, have good housing for good people. And in that process, make a few dollars of passive income that sustains myself and helps me build a team down there.
Yeah.
So,
And so you had mentioned earlier in the discussion too that you had done some triplexes.
oh yeah, that's my sweet
And
spot. So that's why
yeah,
I'll
and
do that
so
again.
and I think that that's a great spot to be, especially with where you're at right now, because it's not so big and overwhelming that it creates big management
Mhm.
issues where you have to manage a management company
Mhm.
basically, or manage a property yourself. It's smaller. It's a bit more. It's easier to potentially get cash flow on a triplex than a single family.
Mhm.
So it seems like it's right in that area where new investors, if they're looking to actually get in and own property, a
Mhm.
duplex or a triplex can be a good option, a good way to go. And so would you say another thing you mentioned earlier was the storage units? Now,
Mhm.
I don't know what the demand is necessarily. I haven't done much research on storage in Puerto Rico here, but if you're certainly in bigger cities, that's
Mhm.
another option. And what's really nice about that is that it really, there are no tenants. I mean, there are tenants, but nobody lives
Mhm.
there. It's not a
Correct.
matter of having to go through evictions and all of that if things
Mhm.
don't go as planned. So where do you think you're going to land? Do you think it'll be in that duplex triplex area,
Well,
or?
well, it'll be the triplex and up there. Well, you know what? How do we say you fall in love with the cash flow, not the asset itself?
Yes,
So
great.
it's fine. Right now, that serves the community well. A
Hmm.
triplex or above. I like triplex quads, or, not large units like 32 units, but just small, manageable garden style apartments
Hmm.
is where I'm thinking of ending up initially. But then again, I keep my eye open for what the market needs. What asset class does the market want? If there's a lot of people who are renting and they're going to be long-term renters and they're in a city, they need a place to put their things.
Hmm.
Can something be repurposed? Can I find the right people to help do it? Now, the model that was very successful for me and how we looked at placements in self-storage was almost like a hotel, where you would get the property, you'd properly build the property out, then you get a management company in to run it.
Yeah,
And a management company in the hotel was a name like Hilton, Marriott, you know,
sure.
but a name in self-storage is CubeSmart, Uncle
Hmm.
Tom's, any one of the big operators
Hmm.
that have a marketing program and systems in place. So if I was to do something like that down there, I would look for available property that can be, built, repurposed cheaper than it could be built. So that's the successful formula that I've
I
watched
see.
happen.
I see.
But I'm not sure if I want to take that on as a project until I start building some momentum and knowing
Yeah.
the marketplace and knowing what the market really wants to.
Okay. Okay. So then let's go from there, Brandon. When you're working with a client, someone who's looking for property like this, what are some of the questions that the clients should be ready to answer when they meet with you as a broker, when you're ready to help them find what they're looking for?
Sure. A couple that I would say are important. And you're talking about specifically investment properties.
Yeah, I think in this case, I think by asking that first question, is this an investment property? But yeah, so if we get
Hmm.
past that point and saying that yes, it is an investment property, how do you work on narrowing down your clients' wish list to the point so that it's really hitting their target? Again, whether it's self-storage or triplexes or even things like location or
Hmm.
pricing. Anything specific there?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I've noticed is that people operate very differently on um, kind of on emotion of what they feel is the right way to do investing. So to give an example, lately I've got a fourplex that I'm the listing agent on, and I've showed it to people, and there are certain people who are very okay with just repairing it to the minimum level to make it cash flow and rent out. And then there's people who are very dedicated in, oh, I got to do this the right way. And they say the right way, meaning they want to fix it up to a certain level that they see as a high enough quality. When necessary, if you're looking at it from a completely objective perspective where, you know, you're looking at it as an investment and what is it going to take to get that investment cash flowing, versus, you know, what someone might make in an emotional choice of what they want that property to look like and what they would feel comfortable with. So you know, it seems like an obvious question at first of what is your target rental market. But for instance, in this street, and this is kind of a little bit of a unique characteristic of San Juan and of Puerto Rico in general, is you can have a really nice building next to a bunch of really not so nice buildings. So that particular building has a super nice building on one side of it, and then it's got an empty lot with some, you know, some old cars right next to it. Yeah. So it can totally go either way. It could be student housing rental, or it could be it's close to Condado, which is the major beach area, and you know it's right across the freeway, like directly next to the freeway. So it could be considered still sort of Condado, but it's also Santurce, which tends to be has a little bit of everything, but Santurce specifically has a lot of lower end income properties. So
yeah, that's an interesting positioning there, because just like Jim said earlier, and I'll paraphrase it, don't fall in love with the real estate, fall in love with the cash flow. And just like there's a spectrum for active investors to passive investors, and by that I mean there are people who are completely active with very little money, and they team up with passive investors who don't want to do much work and have money to invest, so that it's a spectrum of one side to the other, and one can be pretty much any place in between. It's also, from what I'm hearing you say, it's also a spectrum of the perception, or maybe more than the perception, it would be the acceptable amount of improvements, or the acceptable quality of the living space once it's done. And so there are certain properties that maybe they're in a C area. There's in a lot of cases, it probably wouldn't make sense to renovate that up to an A quality property if it's in a C area, because you're never going to get the cash flow that you would for that type of work that would have to go into it. So calibrating the neighborhood, the quality of the housing in that neighborhood to what the investor's perception of acceptable is, that to me seems, if I understand what you're saying, that there's sort of a calibration exercise that you need, that you'd like to walk through to really understand where people are at.
Yeah, that's correct. And the reason I bring this up, the thing that triggered it for me is I presented a property to Jim in Carolina, which is it's one of the suburbs of San Juan. It's a fairly big city. And this particular property is in great shape. The owners it was basically their dream to have a rental property with a swimming school. The
swimming school.
Yeah. So yeah. One of the owners loved to give swim classes. And so they basically designed this apartment building. They bought an existing apartment building, added on, built a pool, made it into a swimming school. So the tenants don't even have access to the pool. And then as she got older, she stopped giving classes and she started renting it out to another swimming school and whatnot. But basically these people have this particular property was their dream. In a way, it's actually fairly sad because they put every last dollar into making this property better, but their particular style is this building is hideous. It's got the Brady Bunch rock walls on the outside of the building. It's painted blue and white, and it's got some, I mean, I feel bad even saying it, but it's got some murals that somebody painted all over that, you know, they obviously spent tons of time. And the murals have sentimental value to the owners because of who painted them. And they put all this money into tiling every possible surface that they could tile. And so the building is in excellent condition. There's basically very little deferred maintenance. They say that they have no problem renting it out. They haven't, there's a couple units that are vacant because they've been planning on selling it. And so they haven't really announced the vacancies. So it's a good property for someone who doesn't care about how something looks.
Which is unfortunate because the previous or the current owners took it to the other extreme of they were so involved with and such an emotional attachment to how it looked, and what looked really good or their definition of beautiful was, unfortunately, it sounds like a lot different than what maybe the general public would be. So it took it from one extreme of putting way too much work into a property potentially, that now there's been so much money, life savings put into it the way it sounds. And that doesn't even bring it into an average sort of position from acceptable from, let's say, from design standards or what people like to live in. It's actually taken it to the negative side, if I'm understanding you correctly, because of some of the colors, because of some of the way things were done, because of a swimming pool right inside the building and all of that. So it's kind of the worst of it's both ends of that spectrum as well. So
yeah. And I guess maybe a qualifier too is that construction styles are different here. So maybe from the US perspective, we might think it's uglier. And a lot of it is just that it's outdated too. So I mean, they're older and so it's tiled with 1980s tile everywhere. And so it's totally workable, and there's some fairly easy fixes you could do to get past that.
So on that note, I guess we have the goal of identifying as close as possible what it is that the buyer is looking for, what it is that makes a property the most efficient, probably from a cash flow, especially if it's a rental income property. What is it? Is it something that is going to be pride of ownership, or is it something that's going to be improved or at the stage of average for the neighborhood? Those are the types of things that will obviously affect cash flow and things like that. So do you have any questions specifically that you would ask Jim now that would help you get closer to where he's at? And I know you've been working back and forth. So I just, if you can think of anything right now, and if not, then we'll continue on. But
sure. I guess one of the things that we had been emailing back and forth, and we haven't actually had much of a chance to discuss in person, was just the idea of getting to know a neighborhood and becoming an expert in that neighborhood, and how important that is. The reason I ask is because in San Juan, there's a lot of properties available. The market is fairly inefficient in terms of marketing and that sort of thing. Agents here generally, the majority, I would say, don't use MLS. They use a really kind of crappy version of Puerto Rican Craigslist. And they're not always up to date and stuff like that. So there's a lot of opportunities, but it takes a lot of sifting through. And when things there's a lot of things that are for sale that are not really published anywhere.
Yeah, so just for a little clarification on inefficient market, I think maybe a comparison there would be an efficient market would be something more like, let's say, like the stock market, where there are buyers and sellers all the time. And so it becomes a lot harder to find those really sweet deals or find those nuggets, those really the ones that could be really valuable to work with, because it's so efficient that everybody sees all the details of everything that's going on. Whereas in an inefficient market, I think what I'm hearing you say in Puerto Rico here is that because there's not a well-oiled MLS system, multiple listing service system, or there's not a way to really get really on time numbers of sales, and the efficiencies just aren't there, which then means there could be a lot more opportunities that could be dug up with a little bit more work and looking in spots that aren't necessarily so obvious. By spots, I mean whether that's the way it's structured or the way or who the owners are. Maybe it's an estate or whatever, and it's a lot harder for everybody to just look at it and say, "Yep, that's it," because of this. You end up spending more time uncovering, but it also can allow for better deals in the end too. So
yep, exactly.
So can I jump in here for a second? Because 2 points I wanted to make is that's the perfect point for calibrating your eyes for an area, because if it's inefficient market, and you have a lot of variation from block to block, or a great building next to an empty lot with cars on it, you really need to know the potential of that area, because just say, "Oh wow, look how beautiful the building is," but if you don't know, well, that area is never going to come, to anything, or the area might be fine, but it's surrounded by a lot of bad areas, so good people can't get in and out easily. You have to know, and if you have to know the area you're actually looking at, I'm going to say it's very similar to when you look in the larger metro markets, like say New York, the Bronx. One block can be night and day from the other, right? One slight 2 blocks away, and you're in a total different income bracket. So I'm not being familiar with Puerto Rico. I need to spend some time to take advantage of the inefficiencies by learning 1 or 2 specific areas really well. So when a nugget does come up, it's like it shines. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we found something of this quality in this area at this price. And that is being able to recognize it. And if I'm looking at Fajardo one day and Ponce the next day and Mayaguez the next day and then San Juan, I won't have I won't build any momentum with knowing what a gold nugget really looks like. Right. In any one of the markets. That's why my conversation to you. Okay. Now, there's a second half I want to bring into this, is especially for investors at a distance. Now, you're talking to investors locally, and you're getting their impressions. Now, when you invest in a distance, what I'm finding is really important to listen to your property manager or your potential property manager. So, regardless of the color of the tile or how things will look, you actually work with your property manager, says, what is the plan for this property? Because they will know better than you. That's what I believe right now. They're closer to it. So if the property manager says, look, this right now, is a bit of a diamond in the rough, and when we invest these dollars this time and make these improvements, this property will perform at a very different level. You have to be willing to take that input. So I'm saying another way you might want to gauge some of your potential investors is how willing they are to listen to you. Yeah. Right. If of course, if they're local and they've been in the market for 20 years, they'll have their perspective. But someone coming into a market like myself or anyone who wants to invest alongside with me has to be willing to listen to, the advice of the experts and build a team around them they can trust and say, oh, these guys know what they're doing. And when they say the swimming pool could be rented out to someone else and you make money on it, you can say, well, then I guess it can, let's work on what that viability of that is. I don't want to dwell on one particular property. This is a very interesting thing. We could spend time just talking through it. Maybe we will after. But that is a good point, though, because if let's just say that there was a perfect use for this indoor swimming pool in an apartment building that's too small to normally be able to handle that, then finding that would be a potential really good nugget if you were able to find that niche land for whatever it might be. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. And I also think that there's ways, not only geographically, but there's strategies. Like, let's just take, for instance, probate. Maybe, and this is something Brendan and I have spoken about, is maybe there are some unique probate opportunities because of such an inefficient market as it relates to multiple listing services or public records that show exactly where everything is at. So there could be ways of digging out some really interesting information or bits that would allow us to get in and be right on the front line of some really like a when you're digging for gold, you find the what's it called,
slit of gold, the area of gold. And so
The vein, right? They call it the vein.
That's what I'm thinking of, the vein of gold. And so, if that's certainly a possibility in an efficient market like this.
Well, you have another factor working towards you, and that you've an interesting point. Again, if I was to share another resource with someone, it would be Harry Dent's demographic insights. And how does demographics actually work on the island of Puerto Rico? Now you have social and demographic trends working there. I'm going to tell a bit of a joke that I was actually working with someone from the SBA in the Bronx. We're talking about, getting an office condo for my wife, and he volunteers that he's Puerto Rican. And he's second generation, and we spend now 45 minutes speaking about the social economic paradigms of Puerto Rico. So if you want to know what's going on in Puerto Rico, just last week. So if you want to understand what's going on in Puerto Rico, you got to go to the Bronx.
That's good.
I'm laughing because there was such a large migration, right, from Puerto Rico that he was talking about his parents, came over here. He's born here. He's now a lawyer. He's working in the city. But he was talking about how what the grandparents think, where kids are moving, who's leaving the island, who's staying on the island. All those conversations create economic opportunities or considerations for finding that vein. Right. So probate can be very powerful. If you have a lot of people leaving the island, right, that because they can't find the jobs or the mobility they're looking for, right, and the older people are passing away, and the children don't want to come back, don't want to really, enjoy the paradise that's really in front of them because they want to go to California, Chicago, New York, and get the excitement, levels that, you want at a certain point to your life. So you might have hit something very powerful there, basically from social and demographics, that might be, as well as now, so other people want to come flooding back into Puerto Rico because of the exposed opportunities and the changing laws that got a lot that are trying to, as they cultivate investments.
Yeah, and I think it's like any other market. I believe that Puerto Rico is definitely in one of its lowest spots ever. But with that, there's always the cycle, or there always has been a cycle of coming out of those spots. So what we're doing now ourselves is we're kind of doing some projects in the area, nothing really big, nothing really aggressive, but we're staying in the market and working it so that when we do see the market shift and turn and move up again, that's when we'll be positioned to really, with our, whether it's our fund or individual investors, we'll really be able to help out and take advantage of the markets, but do it in a way where it's really helpful for the people in Puerto Rico as well. So we'll wrap it up here in just a bit, but Brandon, Jim, do you have any last thoughts as far as like the next steps for working together? Or do you want to should we leave it at, we'll see where things go and maybe give an update at some point on another podcast? I'm
going to tie two things together. One is my leaving of the engineering and the fat W-2 world and investing in Puerto Rico for lifestyle. There's another thing that comes about that, and that's your eyes now become open to creativity.
Yes. In
a different way. So before, talk to any bank and they'll give you a mortgage. That's great. Be a high net worth individual and just pound your chest because you're a great credit score. But now when you're doing it on your own, when someone says, well, this property offers seller financing, or you can actually work with other people who invest beside you, and you manage the assets, they manage they provide funds, and you provide a return. You get to get more creative. So I think Puerto Rico is the area to explore this creativity right now, at least for myself. So, and that's the conversation I have with Brandon is instead of, how do we now look at things that don't always fit the mold of your standard, I have a house, you're buying a house, go to the bank, get a mortgage and move forward.
Yes.
Yep, exactly.
So I think that's where it all ties together. You're creating a lifestyle, but you're doing it without, again, outside of the canary cage. You're doing it, right? You're doing it where you have to now, you're not under the influence of, banks, media, corporations, et cetera. You have to now figure out how to make it happen yourself. And it's scary, it's exciting, and all at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to talk about, after
Great.
this call.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great insight. If you had one piece of information or resource, or let's say it's a book or a website or something that you think would be valuable for anyone that's in a situation similar to where you're at, or anyone that might be listening to the podcast, to help them really either become more confident or more knowledgeable or get better insight of where they want to go, what would that be?
Yes. Well, outside of the technical conversations of, Rich Dad has its material, Anton had material, and Dent has material, the person I'd have them look at is John Maxwell, and a book called The Difference Maker. To summarize that really in a nutshell would be, your attitude makes a huge difference on how things come about. Now, it won't, make a 5-foot-high man be able to jump 7 feet in the air just because he thinks he can. He has the attitude for it. But it will make the difference in many situations on how the outcome comes out. How you look at it. Again, I hate to say it, it's an inner game piece.
Yep.
Going back to, admiring what Willie does, and things like that, helps you get your mindset right. This is another person helping you get, I'm not talking about inner game per se, but he's talking all about what Willie calls inner game.
Yeah. And that was the difference maker.
The difference maker. And the difference maker is your attitude.
And who is the author again?
John Maxwell.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Excellent.
So I'd share that.
No, this has been great. I think what we'll do, we'll wrap it up now. But if anybody would want to reach out to you, ask you questions, or maybe look at teaming up or whatever that might look like, how might they be able to reach you?
That's great. I have, I'll use the simplest email address possible. Is I have a Gmail address. It's Licata, licata.james@gmail.com. And it's, it goes against all the branding gurus that say you have to use a branded name, but it's the easiest to, doesn't have a lot of consonants and vowels, easy to repeat. So reach out to me there. And again, can I light a candle, on the path that you might be traveling on? If you're coming out of a professional involved world, or if you're deep in a professional world and you want some insights into passive income, from someone who's just getting out of the cage, or, want to invest side by side with me, or, just have a conversation about these things, please reach out to me, licata.james@gmail.com, and we'll start a conversation.
Okay, great. And that's licata.james@gmail.com, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. I want to thank you both for joining me on this episode, and I think you guys have some fun times ahead locating those properties in the paradise of Puerto Rico. So good luck with that, and good talking, guys.
Thank you.
Same to you.